Hi, welcome to Psyphilopod. My name is Cory Clark, and I'm an assistant professor of social psychology at Durham University. And this is my co-host.
Winegard. I'm an assistant professor of not social psychology
Don't be
at
so proud of
Marietta
that.
at Marietta College. Today I'm broadcasting from an undisclosed location in the city of Marietta, but not at the university.
A new undisclosed
Yes,
location.
this
It's
is a new
intriguing.
undisclosed location.
Yeah. We took a very long break. Do we have an excuse for that?
Working on other projects.
Yeah, we were busy.
Yeah,
But a
or
lot of people
lazy.
complained, so we're back. Um, to
So many thousands of complaints.
thousands and thousands of people. I mean, I think at least two or three, so
Yeah,
it's
that's
something.
fair.
Yeah. Um, so today we're going to talk about the online journal Quillette. Um, Bo should probably reveal his biases here. He's written for them, what, like 20 times?
I have, I think, at least 10 essays. There are probably a few
I feel
more.
like it's
So,
more than that, but yeah.
yeah, probably a few more. So, I'm certainly not an impartial observer here.
No. And you're a friend of Claire's, the editor-in-chief.
I consider myself a friend of Claire, a friend of Jamie Palmer, and a friend of Toby Young, all of whom are high editors at Quillette. Yes.
Yeah. I'm not friends with them, but I want to be, so hi, be my friend. um, and I guess I co-wrote one article with you there, so I may be also slightly not impartial either.
Yes, that is correct.
All right. Well, Quillette is one of the maybe more controversial outlets that academics are reading these days. Would you say that's right?
I think that it's safe to say that there are many contentious disputes about the status of Quillette in the academic world, yes.
Yeah, so why don't you tell people a little bit about what Quillette is exactly?
Yeah, I could get this wrong because I actually didn't do a lot of research for this, so I'm telling this essentially from my perspective.
Experience.
Yeah, I do know that it was founded in 2015 because I looked this up on Wikipedia by Claire Lehman. I won't comment on her biography other than to say she's an intriguing person. I'm sure she has a Wikipedia so people can look that up. I think the basic idea originally was more oriented toward sort of scientifically rigorous articles that were difficult to get into, say, peer-reviewed journals. So I think that not that they were going to be written as though they should be in a peer-reviewed journal, but it was going to be much more about scientific ideas, is my understanding. And then it kind of slowly morphed into what I think it's fair to say it has a anti-social justice warrior bent to it. Some people have called it like the official mouthpiece of the IDW or internet dark. What is it?
Intellectual dark
Intellectual
web.
dark web, which I
We don't need to
frank,
get into that.
yeah, never found that an appealing idea or
It's
anything.
a cool
But
name though, you have to admit.
yeah, IDW too is cool as well, so the acronym works. Anyway, it definitely sort of since 2015, and I mean I think I was writing for it in 2015, and my friend Brian Boutwell was as well. It has changed noticeably into more political, more focused on social justice warrior outrages, etc. Not obviously not completely dedicated to that. Still published plenty of scientific
Mhm.
stuff, but less of that. And I think Claire herself expressed some of this in an interview with I can't remember an interview I read anyway. She said this is just kind of what sort of organically happened to the website.
Yeah, so their stated mission is that they support free thought and free exchange of ideas, and that they'll publish even dangerous ideas. Um, so it seems like it was mainly inspired um, by maybe Claire noticing that it was really challenging to get certain ideas published, and that certain ideas were sort of being pushed out of the conversation. And so this was sort of a place for people who maybe didn't fit in with the typical progressive agenda of many academic fields to publish some of their, maybe get some exposure for some of their work, but then also maybe publish some of their ideas in general.
Yeah, I think more so I saw it as not so much a kind of outlet for
I think she
academic.
mainly wanted to publish academics, though. Is that not right?
I think so, but I don't think it was. I don't want to give the impression that this was going to be a repository for failed peer-reviewed articles. I don't think that was the idea. I think it was more of a popular format for the ideas that were very heterodox, that it was quite difficult for academics to get them to a broader population, right? Because you can, if you scanned the sort of internet landscape of popular outlets, you have Vox, you have Slate,
Mm-hmm.
Atlantic, etc., and it's really difficult to get a lot of these ideas in those outlets.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I kind of saw Quillette as filling that niche.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of important because it it maybe partially addresses some of the criticisms, which is they don't seem to publish everything. They don't publish a lot on all topics. And they don't seem, at least as far as I can tell, to represent all perspectives.
Well, don't you think we should, if we're going to go through this, are we focusing on criticism now?
Let's maybe, I think what we said we were going to do is we were going to say, what do they say they're trying to do?
Okay.
What does it look like they're trying to do? And what have they actually accomplished?
And then are we going criticisms?
Yeah, then, I mean, criticisms might get peppered in there, but
okay.
But yes, we can also do criticisms separate from that if you want as well. So I think we've kind of discussed already what they say anyway, what they say they're trying to do. What they say they're trying to do basically is just support free thought.
Expand the Overton window.
Yeah, and and I think the reason they say even dangerous ideas is because a lot of what they publish is stuff that other journals wouldn't publish.
Other online outlets.
Other online journals,
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Or if they would, it would be like 1 in 1,000 or something, right? Like Vox might publish one reasonable essay on intelligence out of like 150.
One reasonable one.
I think there was a Stuart Ritchie article on IQ at Vox that was actually reasonable.
Yeah, so that's what they say they're trying to do. And I think where their criticisms, maybe where some of the criticisms will come in, is in what they've actually been doing. So what does it look like they've been doing? What do they actually publish? Because they certainly have certain themes, and I think their followers like them for these certain themes. So what do they actually publish?
Well, I mean, I think the thing that probably holds Quillette together the most, that holds the authors together, who actually are quite varied politically. I think the thing that holds them together, however, is hostility toward social justice warrior types. That's a derogatory word. It's perhaps a good one. I can't really think of a better one right now.
Progressive social justice agenda or something.
Hostility toward sort of extreme progressivism, let's say, seems to be what holds pretty much all of the writers together.
That seems right to me too, yeah.
Yeah, so I think a lot of articles about people getting deplatformed, about books getting censored or something, academics getting fired, this outrage, that outrage, whatever, Murray getting talked down at Middlebury and the sort of violence that ensued there, a lot of that kind of stuff. So that seems to be...
Well, some of that would fit within the free thought agenda, right? Because they should oppose people being shouted down in general, regardless of the reason they're being shouted down, right?
Well, I'm going to argue that the overlap between the two, the
Mm-hmm.
sort of anti-progressive um, thrust of Quillette and the commitment to free speech actually overlaps quite a bit. And so the
Yeah.
criticism that it's just a
Through
vessel.
through no fault of Quillette's necessarily.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, okay,
But it
but
does seem as though that, I mean, if you had to describe Quillette on an elevator to somebody, the proverbial elevator talk, right, you would basically say anti-social justice warrior.
yeah, that seems probably fair to me. Do
Hmm.
you want to talk about, well, I guess you kind of already went over some of the themes of things they publish about, but maybe like what are the things they publish that piss people off?
Well, I think if we focus on, let's say, the scientific content,
Mm-hmm.
it's a very anti-selective blank slate website, right? So it challenges the notion that there aren't possibly human population differences and sex differences and individual differences that are caused substantially by genetics. So there are lots of articles on heritability of IQ, let's say, sex differences, articles defending Demore's infamous memo, some
Mm-hmm.
articles about race, etc. So on the scientific side, I would say that's sort of the theme, is the way that genes cause variation in human phenotypes. On the political side, I would say it's mostly anti-extreme progressivism, and then there are some cultural,
You've been
maybe.
accused of like being opposed to trans, not transsexuality per se. They've been accused of being like a problem for that community though. But I don't really know what they've published on that.
So I guess I would say there's maybe concern about. There have been a few articles expressing concern about the rapidly growing
Mm,
number of conversions or gender dysphoria, and concern about that, and also probably, although I'm not as familiar with this because I don't follow the trans issues as much as other people do, so I'm certainly not an expert on this, but I know um, Jordan Peterson, who of course is revered by probably a lot of the writers there. He became, I mean, this isn't the only reason, but one of the reasons he got famous was videos in which he was railing against, I believe, a Canadian law that was going to make it a
mm,
criminal offense for misgendering people. And he said, he would personally use a person's preferred pronoun, but thought that it was an intolerable affront to free speech to make it illegal to use the wrong pronoun. And I suspect people have defended him about that on Quillette as well.
hmm.
But I don't know as much about that. So
Do you want to talk a little bit about what you have written for them or like the themes of what you've written for them?
yeah, that's interesting. I
Because you're one
wonder,
of their more controversial writers, perhaps.
possibly, or I soon will be. Um, I would put them into different categories. So I would say one theme of my writings is that human population variation is fascinating, real, and should be studied, and we should talk about it openly, honestly, and judiciously. So that's one. I guess you could call that race, although I'm not particularly dedicated to that term, since the term itself is so incendiary, and I don't like to get distracted by debates about it. And then probably another would be concern about progressivism. So I think I've written a couple pieces about the dangers of extreme progressivism, and then some weird ones, one about, I will say this one holds up really well too, and it didn't do particularly well at the time, but it was about Donald Trump during the primary and why he was winning and why he would keep winning. And
And that was in like 2015 or
it
something.
was maybe in, yeah, I don't know, I mean, it was during the primaries, and I know like Rubio and Cruz were still in the primary, so
Mhm.
I didn't foresee his winning the presidency, but I did think people were not taking him as seriously as they should have been. So I guess that's something. But yeah, I would say probably the cluster. Oh yeah, centrism too. I
Mhm.
would say that was another a couple articles on centrism that I mean actually I think people seem to like the centrism one. So yeah, that's
Mhm.
another one.
And
My own
that's
idiosyncratic view of centrism, I suppose.
yeah. And that's, I think, Quillette politically tries to sort of identify as centrist, sort of. Would you say that's right?
I Yeah, I
Not
don't know. I saw
extreme. No,
some
not
people were
necessarily.
saying libertarianism. I don't think
I saw somewhere that they're part of the alt center.
yeah, I declared my fidelity to the
To the
alt
alt
center
center.
as well, whatever that
Yeah.
is. I honestly don't think I think critics are wrong on there's some sort of like political ideology that they rally around. I don't see that. I don't think that's true. I mean, there are people write for Quillette who are Bernie Sanders supporters. I think the only ideological component that seems to hold most of the people together is an objection to extreme progressivism.
Yeah. I think that's
And
fair because a lot of the people, and I think a lot of the readers probably also are either former liberals or like lightweight liberals, like fives or sixes on a 7 point scale in terms of being liberals, but
lightweight liberals.
lightweight liberals, yeah, opposed to the sevens or the hundreds. I don't know, like the really extreme progressive liberals. But to me, that's kind of interesting because I think they do have a pretty big conservative following,
Yeah, I
despite the
think so.
fact that so many of the writers probably tend to lean left on a lot of issues. But they've attracted a pretty right wing audience, I think.
I don't actually know about the audience. It's really hard to say. So I don't know. I'd
They
have
should
to
put up
see.
a poll for their
Yeah,
readers. I'm
I'd have to
curious.
see data on the audience. I suspect you're right that they get a decent amount of people who would identify as conservatives, but I think um, people are forming odd alliances these days. So a
Out
lot
of
of people,
desperation.
yeah. So I mean, Sam Harris, who's pretty traditionally liberal in the sort of democratic sense, is seen in a coalition with Dave Rubin and Christina Hoff Sommers and the Weinstein brothers, one of whom is a Bernie Sanders supporter or was. I don't know about the other. So I think the ideological thing that again keeps these people together is a commitment to free speech, free inquiry, and a concern about the excesses of progressivism.
Hmm. And is the concern about the excesses of progressivism, is the reason they're critical of extreme progressives, is the only reason because they oppose free speech, or is it more than that? Or do they oppose free speech? And is that the only reason?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, I think there are more issues. In the article that I wrote, Progressivism in the West, in which I expressed my concerns about it, I laid out, I think, 6 concerns. I don't remember them though, so I'm not going to be able to enumerate them. But
I'm
I think,
talking like just in terms of what binds people who like
uh,
Quillette and write for Quillette is what frustrates them with progressivism. Is it is
I
it
think it's
their
obsession with
opposition?
victims groups. I think if you were to kind of look at what's causing most of the variance here, what's causing most of this, it would be an obsession with victims groups from the extreme progressives that causes a lot of different behaviors. It causes concern about speech, right? It causes academic censorship. It
Hmm.
causes support for open borders, for affirmative action, for maybe for undermining of due process because we're supposed to believe all
Mhm.
women. Um,
Well, some of
uh,
those are related to opposition of free speech and some aren't. So I guess
Opposition to what?
to
Yeah,
free
no,
speech and
I
some.
agree. I'm saying what holds all of those things together, I think, is the sacred value about perceived victims groups.
I guess what I'm trying to assess is whether the reason this free thought journal is critical of progressives is the
Hmm.
reason because these extreme progressives oppose free thought, or does that just kind of go along with a bunch of other things they're irritated about?
I think that's a large part of it, but there are other things that are related to it. So
Because if you were in support of free thought, don't you
there
think then you should publish articles about the dangers of open borders and also the costs of not having open borders?
there are articles on that. There are
Okay, they
articles defending
present both
uh
sides.
yeah, there are articles defending more liberal immigration. For example, there are articles defending Bernie Sanders, etc. I think this is what I think the big problem is, though. So, take it, it's not just free speech per se. It's the notion that so we have to, let's say I just take one of my articles because obviously I'm more familiar with my own articles. One article was called "On the Reality of Race and the Abhorrence of Racism." Now, one of the arguments there is that race, basically race exists. It's a category that picks out real human variation, and that this variation is interesting and important, and people should be able to study it. Now, I have no objection with a person writing an article and saying that that's incorrect, right? And
Hmm.
I think Quillette would publish that article. If somebody wrote a well argued article and said, race is an illusion, and we shouldn't use the term not because of political sensitivities, but rather because it actually doesn't pick out real variation in the world, I think Quillette would publish that. What I'm concerned with, and I think the reason you don't get a lot of those articles, is because most of the people who are debating from the other side think that it's morally reprehensible to even suggest, right, that there's really like some sort of meaning with race. So they're not even trying to have a debate. They're mostly attempting to silence a debate. And that's
I'm
why
not
I think you
sure
see this
that's true.
asymmetry.
They're publishing in other journals, right? They're publishing in
They're,
Vox or
well, okay, so
I'm
I,
not saying they're not trying to silence their opponents,
mhm.
but I'm saying they're having their conversation with their fans, you know?
Right, but I do think there's an asymmetry because I honestly, I know this is the case, and I'd be happy for someone to test this. If a Vox writer wrote a good article arguing against my position on race, it
Hmm.
would get published in Quillette. And I would encourage Claire to publish it. If she sent something to me and said, look, this person wrote this, I'd say, sweet, publish it. Let's have the debate. On the contrary,
Hmm.
that is not what would happen at Vox, and we actually have evidence of this because Richard Heyer, an intelligence expert, the editor of the journal Intelligence, attempted to write a pretty milk toast, I mean, pretty innocuous article, and Vox wouldn't publish it.
I mean, it's hard to know why they wouldn't publish it. I'm sure they get a lot of
Okay,
submissions, and it's hard to.
right, but they, to my knowledge, they have not published anything on a lot of these topics that challenges the sort of
And
framework that they work within.
and you think Quillette is better about
Yes.
representing all positions on these
Well,
issues?
I think that's hard
Because that's
because
not my impression, at least. I think they've published a lot of things that are really like critiques even of their own magazine, which is cool. And Claire's been cool about people critiquing Quillette, but I don't think they really do publish all positions on these issues. I don't know if they're not getting submissions or if those submissions aren't getting published.
yeah, so that's worth thinking about. So I think just for an example, I think my brother and I wrote a defense of scientism, and they published an article that was literally a rejoinder to that and
Mm-hmm.
argued the exact opposite position, at least to some extent.
Yeah.
There was one on centrism that argued against my article on centrism.
Mm-hmm.
There, Yuri Harris has published a couple articles there arguing about problems with the IDW,
Mm-hmm.
and they're sort of specifically really challenging David Rubin. And I saw Claire sticking to that and challenging him on Twitter. I do think, and I've I mean, Claire and I don't like talk like we're best buddies or anything, but I've had like an email exchange or two in which I think both of us wished that there were more submissions challenging some of the things that I had written, like specifically about human variation. I want to have that
People,
debate.
submit your papers to Quillette.
Exactly. Let's have the debate, and that's one of the things that I think probably a lot of us I know who write for Quillette lament is that we're not getting high quality articles trying to further
Mm-hmm.
that conversation. And I do think there's an asymmetry between Quillette and, say, Vox. I
Mm-hmm.
think Vox would reject a lot of the articles I've written just on moral grounds, right? They're not even going to have that conversation.
Yeah. Well, this is something I think the issue is that a lot of like high quality articles on that are maybe more, let's say, pro progressive, they will get published in like better known outlets. And
Yes.
so they wouldn't go to Quillette. Quillette is in a unique position where they're getting a lot of really high quality writers because those high quality writers can't publish anywhere else. So they
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
have another
that's fair.
choice. Whereas like people who are pushing the pro progressive agenda, they can publish their papers pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, they can
They
go
have
to
a
the
lot
New
of
York
options.
Times sometimes, they can go to Vox, etc. I think that that is true, but I also think most of the people who are in that universe of discourse, they would read my articles on race and just claim that they're immoral.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't think we should grapple with that and have an honest and open debate. What they would think is this is heinous. It's immoral to even write these things, and that's the asymmetry that's problematic.
Yeah, I like to think that that's a small but vocal minority of people, but I'm not really sure.
Vox can prove me wrong. Happy to see it.
um, okay, so I think we've kind of gone over what they look, what they do publish. I kind of want to focus on what they've only been around for, I guess, approaching 4 years,
Yeah, that's right.
or maybe about 4 years. What have they actually accomplished in that amount of time? Have they improved discourse? They certainly have gotten, I think, they've gotten ideas out there that maybe wouldn't have seen the light of day otherwise. Um,
I mean, I was trying to think about this last night, and I was thinking, I think they've actually changed discourse a reasonable amount because they've given a. It's a for one thing, it's been successful beyond what I could have imagined. So I mean, in 2015, when Brian and I and some other people were, I mean, I didn't write many articles at the time. I don't want to pretend that I was keeping the thing afloat or something, but I did not foresee this level of popularity. I mean, there are lots of academics, Dawkins, Pinker, Peterson, a lot of these people who enjoy Quillette, retweet the articles. It gets serious attention. There are
mhm.
articles at the Chronicle of Higher Education and other things about Quillette. So it's a power in the fact that it gets
Psyphilopod's doing a podcast on
Psyphilopod,
them.
which is
You still
huge.
can't
Is
pronounce
no, that's right.
it.
Um, the so I think one of the reason critics are becoming more and more vociferous about Quillette is precisely because it is
Yeah.
an important part of public discourse. Now a lot of it is, of course, apoplectic. People are just more angry and it's not clear that they're actually engaging a lot of the articles. And unfortunately, something that happens is, oh, it was published at Quillette, so let's ignore it.
Yeah.
Right? You get that kind of a brand name, and then people are like, oh, well, we don't even have to engage with that article because it was published at Quillette.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate. But nevertheless, it does provide a well-read outlet for a lot of ideas that would essentially be silenced in the sort of public domain.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious how much they have mainly united like a new group of like anti-progressives, like a new tribe of people who are now within their own bubble and actually not listening to um, multiple perspectives
Mm-hmm.
versus like how much have they united a group of people who really do disagree with each other and actually are engaging in civil conversations where maybe people really are motivated to get closer to the truth and not, you know, not the way that political discussions usually go where it's like my team, because to me it looks like there is like a Quillette team,
Mm-hmm.
and it does look like they, whatever unites them, maybe it's just being opposed to progressives. It does seem like once you have an identity like that, it's pretty much impossible to escape letting that affect the way you approach new information.
Yeah, so I mean, I think
And I'm
that's a
saying that it might just not be possible to have something like that and avoid the tribal element.
right. So I think it's probably humanly impossible. I
Yeah.
mean, humans, you're going to feel more kinship with some people than with others. And when those people say something, you're going to be more charitable to what they said. You're going to want to defend them against other people. You form friendships with these people.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, am I going to I mean, I try not to excoriate anybody. I really do, like especially publicly. Privately, I might say some things about people. Publicly, I wouldn't. But I'm obviously less likely to about something, say Claire says, or Noah Carl says, or
Hmm.
Brian Boutwell says, because I like these people. However, I don't. I mean, I don't think that. So I think there's sort of like an acceptable amount of tribalism, if you will, that we can probably handle, like friendship tribalism. Um, I'm going to be a little more sympathetic. Yeah, I'm going to want to spend time with these people and talk to them. That I think that's okay. We can deal with that as long as it doesn't become tribalism with a capital T, like the kind of tribalism that prevents other opinions and ideas from being expressed, the kind of tribalism that forms an epistemic cocoon. That's the real problem. And I don't think that's happened yet. I mean, I disagree. I've been in protracted debates with a lot of these people. I disagree with them on a lot of issues, and I know they disagree with me. And I think that's fine, and I'm happy about that. And I probably my guess is in actual voting behavior, I
Hmm.
match Vox better than I match Quillette.
They're
Like
readers or they're writers.
they're writers. I mean, I've never voted for a Republican in my life, so I doubt that. I suspect that the average Quillette reader is Republican, although I don't know that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess I'm wondering, like, is it possible that this free thought identity that they've sort of tied themselves to, they're sort of forced because they made that their mission statement, they're forced to support that idea. Will that protect them? Because I think they will, not only do they occasionally publish things maybe that oppose, I mean, I guess it's writers opposing other writers, but maybe even opposing some of their main themes that they publish.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and maybe they're not publishing all kinds of ideas that are critical of their typical publications, but by saying that they support free thought and free exchange of ideas, they will have to keep publishing that sort of work? And will that protect them? Sorry, I'm not saying this very well. I guess I'm
No,
wondering
I
if.
think making the public commitment to that is important because
Mhm.
it creates the sort of hypocrisy hazard.
Yeah,
Yeah, so if you very publicly proclaim you're about the free exchange of ideas and then you start squashing ideas, that looks really bad.
right, right.
And yes, I do think that that's
The
helpful.
thing is, we can't know if they're squashing ideas, right? We don't know what
I don't
submissions
think
they
they
don't
are.
publish.
Right. I have no evidence that they are, and I doubt that they are. I
Mm-hmm.
do think that if they were, I mean, it's this is what's hard about developing like a brand, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
sort of have a brand, and people have a brand expectation with Quillette. It's like Coca-Cola or something. If you opened a Coke and it tasted like Sprite, you wouldn't be happy with it. And so, yeah, a lot of the readers wouldn't be happy if 10 out of 12 Quillette articles were articles you could find at Vox.
Yeah, like
Now,
say they published an article about how like the only reason there are differences between men and women is because of society's expectations, and that basically women are forced
mhm,
to be feminine because they have to play with dolls when they're kids and things like that.
right.
One, would they publish it? Two, if they did publish it, would their readers even read it? Or would they just ignore it? And so you have two levels of responsibility. You have what are they going to publish? And then are they going to be disincentivized by their readers from publishing those kinds of things? Because of course they just
Yes.
want clicks and reads and shares and things like that, like anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think they would be disincentivized to some degree. I think they would publish articles like that. I'm not in the editorial staff, so I have no idea how they make these decisions, but I think that they would, and those would attract attention for a little bit, mostly because people who read Quillette would attempt to refute the article. um,
Yeah. But this is
I
interesting because does that like what do their readers want from them? Like, do their readers want this free exchange of ideas, or do the readers want just progressive bashing?
I think that right. So I think there are different kinds of readers, right? So clearly
Probably.
there are plenty of readers who probably just want progressive bashing so that they can laugh about it. Yes. That's the sort of extreme tribalism reader. But I think there are lots of other readers who really do want to see interesting and important debates, and they would welcome articles that challenged the standard Quillette article. I'm one of those. If I saw an article that was, trying to argue against hereditarianism or trying to argue against population variation or argue against race or sex differences or pro transgendered men, cis men, transgendered women, excuse me, should be able to play in sports
Hmm.
and women's sports. I would welcome that and read that. And I'm sure there are plenty of people like me. I don't think I'm extremely an extreme outlier on that. So I think, yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's a coalition. Anytime you have a large coalition of people, there are competing motives. Different
Hmm.
people have different motivations. And if you have a successful business, you're going to get a combination of all kinds of motives.
Hmm.
Yeah. No, I think though, really because of the public protestation of commitment to free speech and free inquiry, I think that's important. I think we shouldn't underestimate how important it is to make those claims publicly. Like John Haidt, for example, I think often about this. John Haidt, of course, was the I suppose. I think he was the co-founder of Heterodox. He's just in a position in which if he looks dogmatic, he is going to get absolutely torn apart, right? Because he
Hmm.
has railed against dogmatism and tribalism, and he has done so publicly. And I think that forces him to be
Hmm.
more fair about things.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm wondering have they have they created a bigger divide between, let's say, let's say like moderate progressives? Like, I'm still saying there's an extreme progressive, but like the moderate of the extreme progressives. Have they
Hmm.
pushed people further away more than they have?
Yeah,
Are people more open-minded, or are they less now? Have they
that's a
reached a certain group of people and created a bigger divide between others?
right. So is it like an accelerant for these divisions that were already kind of there?
Yeah.
That's something I think about often as somebody who values compromise and sort of boring centrism and trying to get people together. I think the problem is if there's one thing I don't want to compromise with, it's the people who moralize these issues so that you can't even talk about them. I don't know what the compromise
I
is.
think it actually would almost be okay if people just moralized them. I think it's the not being able to talk about them thing that's really the problem. I mean, I would
Yeah,
prefer
yeah, that's
people didn't call
fine.
people names for affording
Sure.
empirical claims.
Right.
But I think being willing to discuss them without becoming hysterical, uh, that's really what
Yes.
you want.
Yes.
Um,
I mean, part of this, I've thought a lot about this, right? And this is sort of tangential to Quillette, although it's related. Part of this depends upon the empirical plausibility of the claims. So let's say race differences in IQ, let's say, I think is different from assuming that there are like sex differences such that women are implacably manipulative and evil.
mhm.
Now, if that were my empirical claim that women are evil, and then let's say I operationalized evil, that would rightfully be laughed at, and people would say that kind of a morally charged claim doesn't have a place in science, right?
Mhm.
Or if I insisted that women are 50 times more aggressive than men,
Mhm.
it would be understandable for somebody to question my motives given how untrue that is, right? So
Well, that's
but when a lot of these other topics that you're talking about that I'm irritated that people moralize them, the reason I'm irritated that they moralize them is because generally they're at least plausible,
mhm.
right?
Yeah, well, that kind of brings up another issue that I wonder. This is maybe a concern for free speech in general, is like, where do you draw the line? I think everyone draws
I
it
know.
somewhere.
Yes.
And who is to
Quillette
decide?
obviously draws the line.
They draw it, yeah, they obviously draw the line, and I think most people do. Like, no
Yes.
one wants to give a platform to like KKK members or like actual
Correct.
Nazis.
Right.
Um, So we all draw the line somewhere.
Yep.
And so
Agreed.
the fact that we can see, maybe as people who are more in support of free speech than the average person, that we can see that there's a place to draw the line,
Yes.
doesn't that mean that it's maybe perfectly reasonable for other people to have their line be slightly more cautious than ours, or
Well, I mean, that seems like an odd argument because that would be like my saying, well, we all kind of draw this line at human contact. So, like, if I'm on a subway and I bump against somebody, we would agree that probably doesn't count as sexual harassment. If we took your argument would be, well, the line is arbitrary. Everybody has
but
a line, so maybe we shouldn't have one at all.
But
How can we judge?
shouldn't there be like a range of lines that we would tolerate,
I
maybe?
I think,
Like
yeah,
like
I
the
think,
most extreme and then the least, and then like this range is like an
yeah,
understandable range.
yeah, I think there's a sort of fuzzy world of acceptable lines. But just because that's fuzzy and to some degree the boundary is arbitrary doesn't mean that any line is as good as any other. So yeah, I'm sure Quillette would not publish if I wrote an article called a reinterpretation of Heinrich Himmler, and it was like a favorable account of him. I doubt Quillette would want to publish that, even though they said they were, quote, in favor of even dangerous ideas. They don't want to entertain that idea, and I don't blame them. So they have a line there.
Mm-hmm.
Then the question is, okay, what you're saying is, well, look, like they have that line. They're not going to publish pro-Nazi essays. Maybe some other social justice warrior has a line that is, we're not going to allow you to talk about race. And you're
Mm-hmm.
saying, well, how can you say one line is wrong and the other line's not? I think you can, though. I think we can debate the lines, and I agree with you. It's fuzzy, but just because it's fuzzy doesn't mean, I mean, there's a better line than others. There's a better place to draw the line. It's better to, in my opinion, it's better to make it as expansive as possible,
Mm-hmm.
because generally speaking, I think humans' tendency is to exaggerate the danger of ideas, not to minimize. That seems to me that their tendency.
Maybe, although ideas have been pretty dangerous in the past that probably people didn't anticipate. But but let's bring it back.
Agreed. Agreed.
Let's bring it back to, I think, the question we started on, which was, have they created a bigger divide between people?
Oh yeah, yeah. That was, and what I guess what I would say is, if, although I am a squishy centrist, if the divide, this is one area where I don't compromise. If the divide, if it's made a bigger divide between people who are supportive of free speech and inquiry and people who aren't, I'm okay with that. If that's a battle
Mm-hmm.
that actually has to be fought culturally, I don't generally like cultural battles that much. I'd rather, we get together and try to be rational about it, although that's obviously mostly a pipe dream. In this case, I'm on the front lines of that battle. I'm happy to have that battle. It is not okay that people like Noah Carl get fired, and I'm going to fight that battle. I'm willing to have it.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, if Quillette succeeds in making it more clear who's on the other side of that issue, I'm happy with that. Now that doesn't mean that we can't have friendly discourse with those people. It just means I fundamentally disagree with them and I want to have that debate.
Yeah. So potentially the only people that they really would have pushed away would be the people who oppose the free speech idea, and well, I don't think that's necessarily true, because they probably have pushed progressives away in general, even progressives who probably are sort of supportive of free speech, but that might.
I'm skeptical of that.
Okay, it's hard to
I
know.
mean, it is hard to know, but I don't know why some. Well, let's put it this way, and I know this is anecdotal, um, but we can start from anecdote. The people I've seen denigrating Quillette
Mm-hmm.
clearly have what I consider illegitimate moral concerns and clearly
Mm-hmm.
want to moralize many issues that I don't think should be moralized, and are not people. If I'm in any tribe, and I'm generally not in a tribe, I'm not in their tribe. I'm definitely not
Yeah.
in that tribe. I haven't seen a sort of. I've seen cautious criticisms of Quillette with which I agreed, but those people weren't repulsed by Quillette. They just wanted it to be better, and they had, fair criticisms of it.
Yeah. It is interesting because you kind of see among it must be different for non-academics, like their relationship with Quillette must be different than the way it is for academics, because what I see, it's kind of helped me identify like particular types of academics, maybe like the people who do like Quillette, people who write for Quillette,
Mm-hmm.
or who are at least generally supportive of its mission.
Yes.
It's kind of this like subgroup of academics now that have, I think, identified each other
Yes.
through their support for Quillette. We didn't know
Yes.
that, oh, this is a person that you can talk to about these different kinds of
Yeah.
ideas.
For
This is a
example,
person you cannot talk to about these kinds of ideas.
W. Keith Campbell, for example,
Mm-hmm.
is one that stands out to me because I was, you know, I will admit I even kind of had a negative view of him because he was on the culture of narcissism stuff, and I fundamentally disagreed with it. I remember I think it was the first Quillette article I wrote was in fact a sustained attack on that idea, and he commented on it and said he was always happy for debate or something. It was like very cordial about it. I think he somewhat disagreed. I don't know exactly what his view is, but that was like cool. I thought awesome. And
Mm-hmm.
then I slowly came to realize that yeah, he champions free debate and wants to have these discussions, and that does set him apart from other academics. And you're right, we sort of, in some sense, we've located each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, oh, okay, cool.
There was kind of an assumption that everybody was like a pretty extreme progressive, and then and that people maybe were opposed to a lot of kinds of ideas, and then Quillette came along and I think, yeah, helped people identify other uh I don't know how to describe the group of people necessarily, but probably maybe one way is just people who are concerned about the political are completely like progressive homogenous group of psychologists or social psychologists or whatever group of people. I don't know where I'm going with this, but
Well, I mean, I have a different view of that. So
okay.
I the thing is, and I've talked to my brother a lot about this, and so it's not like a novel idea. Other people, I'm sure, have had it, but I think in some sense, even the sort of political bias issue in social psychology, especially in social psychology, right? But across other domains of psychology, it's framed in a politically correct way. And I think I find
What do
that
you mean?
amusing because people try to make it about political bias per se, but it's not about political bias. It's about victims groups, period. If you get rid of the victims groups, you don't have a problem. People can write about gun control. Yes, people get worked up about it, but nobody's getting fired because they've written about gun control. And it's not causing serious bias in the field. The only thing that really causes bias in the field is writing about perceived victims groups, trans people,
I'm
race,
not entirely
especially
sure
race.
that's true. Like, you can't really
I think that's
oppose
true.
climate change for, I mean, not, I
Okay,
don't want to say
well,
like oppose it full force, but you can't even really be like critical of the extreme
I
estimates.
don't think anybody would call for my job if I wrote an article about climate change. Now, it might be different. I've heard
If you wrote an
people.
article saying it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, I don't. Let's put it this way. I would not feel uncomfortable saying that to anybody. That wouldn't worry me. Would it worry you to say that? I mean, I'm not. That doesn't mean that people wouldn't react, maybe
I've
even
seen people get pretty
explosively.
worked up
But
about what they perceive as climate change denial, which might just be climate change minimization or something.
I agree. But when you can point to a postdoc who got fired for writing about climate change and how it's you know uh, a
Sure. I
complete
guess I guess
myth.
I guess I guess you're right that those are the more extreme cases, but I don't
Right.
think it's completely limited to uh if you want to call them victims groups or whatever, traditionally conceived disadvantaged groups or
I think that's what's doing most of this. So I think the reason that I am friends with a lot of conservatives with whom I share few political values, I suppose, is because they are better on those issues. So yeah, I feel more kinship with a lot of conservatives, even though I disagree with them about top marginal tax rates and abortion, etc., because they don't get so worked up and morally they don't wag their finger with moral disapproval if I talk about human variation. And I think a lot that's what unites a lot of people, right? Is that it's not liberal bias or conservative bias. It's that issue.
Again,
Those are the issues.
I think in terms of like how extreme the problem can become, it might be around those issues, but I suspect it wouldn't be easy to publish an article that was somehow pro-life, let's say. I'm not saying you'd lose your job if you wrote an article like that,
I don't
but
think.
I don't think you'd have an easy time publishing that in a mainstream social psychology journal.
Okay, so I agree that there would be a little bit of bias on a lot of these things. Same thing with gun control. I think there would be some bias on it, but you
Hmm.
can write, you would feel safe, your job would feel secure, even if you wrote the pro life article, right? I don't think many people who are
But
fervently pro
you
life
might
have to
not
worry
get a
about.
job in the first place.
Oh, okay,
Say
yeah,
you're
so
a
that,
grad student and you've been publishing like pro-life articles, you're probably not getting hired,
okay, but you
right?
would be, you would be probably, that would probably hurt your chances on the job market. Yes, I agree with that. So that's fair. So I suppose maybe it would be, maybe I should qualify what I said. I think if you got rid of the sort of disadvantaged groups bias, or what Bauer calls the victims revolution, if you got rid of that, you these would be like very small problems. They would still be problems and people should talk about them, but I wouldn't be very worried about it. I'd be like, okay, this is a problem. You should be able to write a pro-life article, and it shouldn't hurt your job chances, etc. I just don't think it would be that big of an issue, though. I mean, if we ever got, let's say this, if we get to the point at which writing about human population variation is treated the way writing about gun control or pro-life is, I would be happy. I'd be thrilled at that. I'd be like, wow, yeah, some people don't like it, and maybe some people say it was wrong and be very critical of it, but you can do it without getting threats for your career, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, yeah. Again, I think in terms of how extreme the problem is, it's probably yes in the domain of victims groups, let's say, but I think the bias against anything anti-liberal is probably a pretty big problem in terms of publications and getting hired in the first place and things like that. But we're kind of getting off topic. um, so we're about at an hour. Um, so maybe we'll try to wrap it up with maybe sort of like an overview of what you perceive to be the most valid criticisms of
Mm-hmm.
the journal, and then maybe if you want to end with just saying like whether it's been overall a good thing.
Yeah, so I think the most valid criticism, and a criticism that I viscerally feel as well when I'm reading some of the articles, maybe even including my own, is is that it can read as though it's sort of a kind of grievance collection in itself. That there are a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of people who feel as though they've been treated unfairly by progressives, and possibly they exaggerate how much one or two things matters in the big scheme of things, and they turn it into this intolerable affront to academic freedom or to conservatives or whatever. So I think there is this legitimate concern that anytime you get people together, I mean, people like to be the victim. They like to complain.
They
It
do.
feels,
They really do.
yeah, I do too. I get on the phone
So
with my
bizarre.
yeah. Well, it's, for one thing, it's a way of bonding with people. Like, you and I are victims of this, right? And it feels good to bond that way. Um, so that's just a natural human proclivity. And then, it's bound to happen when you get a lot of people who have been victimized by progressives, right? So you get that, or they know people who have been, and
Mm-hmm.
you do start to get this overwhelming lament that I'm
Well, what do
sure
you mean by
sounds.
victimized by progressives? You mean basically progressives have,
fired.
well, not many people have been fired.
Right, but when you know somebody who has, when you're friends with somebody who has, right, it's a big deal. It's like somebody getting fired. Yeah, you can say, well, only 10% of people got fired, or
Not
uh,
10%.
I'm sorry, let me rephrase this. It's sort of like the way that a recession feels. Like when you start to know people who have lost their job because the economy is contracting, it feels, close. You empathize with those people and you get upset
Mm-hmm.
about it. I agree with you. I'm not saying a lot of people are getting fired, but a lot of people have been attacked and called outrageous names, and some people have been fired. And a lot of us are friends with people who have been fired or who have had uh, what can only be described as slanderous
Who
websites
really has
devoted
been
to
fired,
them.
though, besides Noah Carl?
Demore.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And people have had website Rational
Somehow
Wiki, for
Demore
example.
seems slightly different to me because he worked for
I think
a
he's
public
different from
company.
Carl. I think the Carl firing is much more outrageous. Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree with
so
that. But
so we have like one case of an academic being fired for not, arguably for not being like pro-progressive enough.
well, we have to keep in mind that I'll let Carl describe his own situation, but we have to keep in mind that a lot of us would be fired or would be in peril of being fired if we didn't censor ourselves, right? I mean, I'll tell you this, and this holds for a lot. I'm sure this holds for a lot of the people who write and read Quillette and enjoy it. We all know at least 5 people who have views that are, I guess, what you would call private views that they will not
Mm-hmm.
share publicly. We, the fact that we have those in science is, I guess, lamentable. It should be lamentable. People should care about that, and I think it's easy to see why you would get people who feel as though they're victims. Now, I think it's dangerous to nurture that feeling, right? It's really easy to get righteous about your own victimhood. It's dangerous to nurture that. And that would be like a concern of mine. I would say, like, we have to figure out the balance between legitimate concerns and just playing the victim.
Mm-hmm.
It really does remind me, this era, and this is related to Quillette, because I was thinking about the best way to describe Quillette and some of these thinkers. It really does remind me of the philosophes in France, especially during the Enlightenment, who had heterodox views that challenged religious authority. And I think a lot of them had private and public views. One of the things that they used to do at that time, it was just kind of considered decent or noble to write anonymously, even though kind of everybody knew who it was.
Mm-hmm.
So like Voltaire would write a pamphlet and people knew it was Voltaire's pamphlet, but he wouldn't put his name on it. And like if you actually put your name on something, in some sense, I think that was ballsy, but also kind of disrespectful because it was just sort of like the way like the way you can have alcohol in a paper sack outside. Like the cops know there's alcohol in there, but like everybody wins because you hide it and they can pretend they don't know what's in it. I
Yeah.
think that was it. So like it reminds me of that a lot, except for we're not writing anonymously, although there have been some anonymous authors at Quillette.
Mm.
Quillette is basically the outlet that is providing the voices for these people who are today's Enlightenment thinkers. I think this is true. I mean, obviously there are some mediocre people, whatever, but these issues are the issues that if humans make it to say 2300 or something, they will look back on and think, okay, those were the people challenging the pieties of the day. And that's what I see. That's the positive, sort of the positive perspective on Quillette.
I hope you're right. um,
As do I.
yeah.
So I would say in my closing would just be by far much more benefit to humans than costs, and it's provided an invaluable outlet to me and to a lot of other people. And what I hope to see is just more people who want to grapple with the ideas that they disagree with openly.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see more of that. I want more people to write articles challenging selective blank slatism, or the view that progressives are selective blank slatists, or the
Mm-hmm.
view that human population variation is important, or the view that there are, a lot of genetically caused sex differences. Let's have that debate instead of moralizing it and then going to our separate camps and not discussing these issues. That's what I would like to see.
Yeah, I would agree. I would like to see Quillette publish more diverse perspectives, and maybe it's not their fault. Maybe they don't get submissions. But yeah, I think it would be cool if people who disagreed with a lot of what Quillette does would write articles and try to publish them there and participate in the conversation, and then people could evaluate the evidence for themselves. And I just think, yeah, if more people were willing to participate in the conversations without, turning them into personal issues, then we probably all would be better off. Now, whether that's possible, I honestly don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, I can honestly say, if I ever got an article sent to me challenging my views on human variation or something, so
Mm-hmm.
long as there weren't ad hominem attacks in there, I would
Mm-hmm.
encourage it to be published. I would enjoy that.
Yeah, I
And I
would like
think
to
there,
see all scholars being like pretty supportive of researchers and ideas that challenge their own ideas, and
yes, I agree with that.
put it all out there and try not to hide the weaknesses or the flaws in one's own ideas.
Right, I agree. I mean, I think the only line I draw is when people start making
Right. Well, they shouldn't be
unfounded moral
personal. They should
accusation.
they
Yeah,
should be about,
when that starts happening, then no. But yes,
yeah.
I agree with that. Like, we should do that, and I hope that Quillette can be a place that encourages that.
Yes, and I think it's trying to, even if it's not fully there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The limitations, the original sin of humans makes it difficult, right?
Cool. Do you have anything else you want to add?
No, just take original sin seriously. That's my conclusion.
All right. I'll talk to you later.